Hello, my name is Larry Davis, and I'm a senior scientist at Educational Testing Service. First, let me express my thanks for the invitation to speak at the CRELLA Winter Seminar. It's great that you've been able to continue the seminar series online, and I'm honored to join you, even if virtually. Today I'm going to be talking about an investigation of a novel hybrid human-machine scoring approach for a test of oral English. So this is a study Spiros Papageorgiou and I did a few years ago, and which was recently published in a special issue of the journal Assessment in Education. The topic of the special issue is Use of Innovative Technology in Oral Language Assessment, and the editors are Vivian Berry and Fumio Nakatsuhara. I encourage you all to have a look, and this concludes the advertising portion of my presentation. In any case, if you're interested in more details regarding our study, here is the reference. So I think it's useful to start with the observation that scoring spoken language is a challenge for humans or machines. First, understanding and evaluating speech requires the processing of an ephemeral phenomenon, where extended review is either tedious or impossible. Raters also must somehow attend to and evaluate multiple phenomena at various levels, and this is because effective spoken communication entails proficient use of multiple language phenomena operating at multiple levels of organization, such as at the levels of word, sentence, or discourse. These diverse language features must then be integrated into one or more scores. And did I mention that all of this must be done in real time, consistently, over large numbers of responses? So first, let me say that human raters are amazing, but not perfect. So there's potentially scope to use technology to add value to scoring. So let's consider some of the relative strengths and weaknesses of human and machine raters. Humans are able to fully evaluate meaning and other complex language phenomena such as discourse structure. Their scores also reflect evaluation of language use in real life, where it is usually humans who judge whether an act of communication was successful. However, it's been well documented that humans are vulnerable to a variety of biases, as well as simple inconsistency in scoring, which may arise from various factors such as fatigue and so on. In contrast, machines are relatively good at consistently evaluating performance, at least for certain kinds of linguistic phenomena, such as fluency and pronunciation. They also produce scores quickly, are scalable to deal with large numbers of responses, and tend to be less expensive than human raters if the number of responses to be scored is large enough to offset the cost of developing the automated system. But machines don't understand meaning, and they struggle with higher-order language phenomena that are important for effective communication, such as the appropriateness of content or social aspects of language. So it would seem that human and machine raters might have complementary strengths and weaknesses, which could be usefully combined in a hybrid scoring system. And indeed, a variety of different approaches for combining input from human and machine systems have been proposed and used. First, there is the confirmatory approach, where the machine score is used to confirm a human score. If there's disagreement beyond a set limit, the response is flagged for review by a second human rater. In this case, the machine score does not contribute to the final score in any way, and the machine input is simply used for quality control purposes. A second approach is termed parallel contributory, and in this case, both human and machine scores contribute to the reported score. Typically, human and machines both provide holistic scores, with the automated scoring system serving the same role as a second human rater. A third choice is the divergent contributory approach. In this case, human and machine focus on separate aspects of performance. This approach is the focus of this study, and I'll be saying more about this method in a moment. Finally, it's worth mentioning a fourth approach, which I term flag and review. This is essentially a variation on the confirmatory approach mentioned earlier, but in this case, The human serves as a backup for the automated system. During scoring, the automated system flags responses that are unlikely to be accurately scored for some reason, such as noisy audio or whatever, and these responses are sent for human review and scoring. I mention this approach because it's a best practice when using an automated scoring system as the only rater. There will always be some responses that the automated system has problems with, so there should always be some provision for detecting such responses. And without human backup, these responses must otherwise just be thrown out. So, now that you have a picture of some of the ways information from humans and machines might be combined, let's dig a little more deeply into divergent contributory scoring. The question here is whether the seemingly complementary strengths of humans and machine raters might be combined into a hybrid system. Here are some proposals. First, in the domain of writing, Enright and Quinlan 2010 suggested that machines might be used to measure the more quantifiable aspects of essay quality, while humans focus on meaning and the quality of ideas. More recently, Isaacs 2018 suggested that for the assessment of speaking, machines might be used to produce segmental and fluency measures, while humans evaluate cohesion, idea development, and task execution. But these proposals raise some questions. First, is scoring meaning, development, and effectiveness actually a strength of human raters? Humans undoubtedly do this better than current automated systems, but are people actually better at judging the effectiveness of communication compared to their human judgments of more specific elements of speech, such as fluency and pronunciation? And are machines really more consistent than humans in scoring these relatively concrete aspects of language production? So this brings us to the research questions for this study. First, are human analytic scores for topic development more reliable than human scores for delivery and language use? I'll explain what I mean by topic development, delivery, and language use in a moment. And second, are composite human-machine holistic by task scores more reliable than human holistic by task scores? And in talking about reliability, I would like to distinguish between consistency and reliability. Machine scores should be perfectly consistent. That is, if you input the same audio file again and again, you should get exactly the same score each time. But when talking about reliability, I'm referring to the ability to distinguish between performances of differing quality or test takers of different ability. Now, it's worth noting that an automated system that is perfectly consistent may not be especially reliable. For example, if most people get the same score. So for this study, I'm using the term reliability in this latter, more psychometric sense. I would also like to make it clear that this study was an initial investigation. I'll have more to say about this towards the end of the talk, but for now, it's worth noting that the study only considered score quality in terms of reliability. There are many other issues that could be examined, but as an initial, relatively limited study, looking at reliability was considered to be a reasonable first step. The context for this study was the TOEFL IBT speaking test. First, let me make it clear that this context was chosen for convenience only. We had access to responses and also an automated scoring system, SpeechRater, that was developed for scoring the types of spontaneous spoken responses elicited in the TOEFL IBT test. We used the version of the test as it existed prior to 2019, where the speaking section consisted of 6 speaking items, 2 independent items where test takers talk about their personal experiences and opinions, and 4 integrated items where they summarize written and/or spoken content from academic settings. In 2019, 1 independent and 1 integrated item was dropped to make a 4-item test. Each item elicits 45 to 60 seconds of spontaneous speech. In the operational TOEFL IBT, responses are scored on a holistic by task basis, where each response receives a separate score on a 0 to 4 scale. While scoring is holistic, raters are asked to consider 3 subdomains of delivery, language use, and topic development. So let's have a look at these. The delivery subdomain covers various aspects of fluency and intelligibility of pronunciation. To give you some idea of how these phenomena are framed for raters, some keywords mentioned in the scoring guide include flow, pacing, articulation, intonation, and rhythm. In the language use subdomain, the focus is on the accuracy and range of grammar and lexis. Some keywords here include range, complexity, accuracy of use, precision, coherence, and automaticity. The final subdomain is topic development, where the content and organization of the response is considered. Keywords here include sufficiency, relevance, development, accuracy of content, and coherence. There are actually 2 scoring guides, one each for independent and integrated speaking tasks. Descriptions for delivery and language use are essentially identical across both guides, with scoring criteria for topic development varying slightly to account for the differing task demands. As an initial step, we obtained human scores for responses produced by TOEFL IBT test takers. Holistic scores were obtained from operational scoring. We also collected analytic scores. These were obtained from a separate scoring exercise where TOEFL IBT raters scored each subdomain separately. Analytic scores were obtained for a corpus of 1,200 responses, with the responses divided into 2 equally sized partitions. One partition was used to train the automated system, the training partition. The other partition was used to evaluate the performance of the automated system and for further analyses. For the training partition, responses were selected using stratified random sampling, based on holistic score, to give a relatively flat distribution across score bands. So we did this because we used multiple regression as the machine learning approach, and we thought that a more even sampling across score levels might produce a better performing scoring algorithm. For the model evaluation partition, we used simple random selection so that the score distribution reflected the distribution of scores in the test-taking population. The idea here is that scoring performance would then more realistically reflect performance than might be expected in real life. For machine scores, the first step was to train the scoring model, or scoring algorithm, to produce analytic scores for the subdomains of delivery and language use. We did not produce a scoring algorithm for topic development, given that we already knew that the system had limited capacity to evaluate this aspect of performance. I won't go into much detail, but the procedure used to train the scoring model started with entering responses from the training partition into SpeechRater, which then generated around 170 language features, or language measures, for each audio file. Lasso regression was then used as a screener to automatically select a small number of these features for use in the scoring algorithm. This was followed by manual review of the language features to ensure that they were relevant to the subdomain being measured. For delivery, no changes were made, but for language use, several features were removed because the original model for language use that was produced by lasso regression actually contained several features related to fluency. We removed these features from the language use scoring model to make a clear distinction between the language use and delivery subdomains. Then, the resulting measures were entered into a linear regression to produce weightings for each feature, which gave the final scoring algorithm. The model training procedure was done twice, once to produce a scoring algorithm for the delivery subdomain, and again for the language use subdomain. Once a scoring algorithm was produced, it was used to compute machine analytic scores, which were then used for subsequent analyses. So this slide gives you an idea of the composition of the scoring models, or scoring algorithms, for delivery and language use. A major benefit of using a regression approach to train the scoring system is that it makes transparent the relative contributions of different features. And there are some drawbacks to this approach as well, which I'll mention a bit later on. The values labeled as weight represent standardized beta values that have been adjusted so that all values total up to 100%. And I would again note that these weightings were determined empirically following the manual review step. The numbers in parentheses are the numbers of features, or distinct language measures, included for each type of language phenomenon. So we can see that for delivery, fluency features made up approximately 2/3 of the scoring model, with pronunciation features making up the remaining third. Similarly, for language use, vocabulary features accounted for about 2/3 of the score, while measures related to grammar made up the remaining third. This table shows inter-rater agreement for the analytic scores, and it gives a sense of how well the automated system simulated human analytic scores. Weighted kappa is a measure of absolute agreement, computed based on scores for individual responses. The inter-rater correlation at the item level shows how similarly individual responses were ranked, and inter-rater correlation at the total score level shows how similarly test takers were ranked. The columns labeled human-human show the agreement between two human raters. All the responses were double scored. And the columns labeled machine-human show agreement between machine scores and a randomly selected human rater. Machine-human agreement was consistently lower than human-human agreement. At the item level, human-human correlation ranged from 0.70 to 0.73, while machine-human agreement was about a tenth lower, ranging from 0.61 to 0.65. At the total score, or test taker level, there was a similar pattern, but with a more pronounced difference, where human-human inter-rater correlations were at 0.92, and machine-human correlation ranged from 0.72 to 0.75. So this is actually a fairly common result in our experience, and likely has to do with central tendency in machine scores. So let's look at that next. This slide illustrates what I mean by central tendency in machine scores. As you can see from the score distributions, compared to human analytic scores, the machine scores for delivery and language use tend to cluster more towards the center of the scale, particularly around a score of 3. Interestingly, however, the distribution of machine analytic scores was more similar to the distribution of human holistic scores for the same responses. The central tendency seen in machine scores is at least in part a consequence of using regression as the machine learning approach, and this is something I will discuss further later on. But one also wonders if human raters were potentially spreading out responses across different analytic scores, perhaps a bit more than they should have. So this brings us to research question number 1. Are human topic development scores more reliable? Overall, reliability of human analytic scores was similar or higher than the reliability of holistic scores. The means and standard deviations were also similar across all 3 types of human analytic scores. However, the mean of human holistic scores was a bit higher, and the standard deviation was somewhat lower, which was also apparent in the previous slide. Notably, of the human analytic scores, topic development had the lowest reliability. So, the finding for research question 1 was that topic development scores produced by human raters were not more reliable. They were actually slightly lower. And, as you might recall from the previous slide, the score distributions for human analytic scores were similar. So, restriction of range isn't the difference here. Rather, this lower reliability would seem to suggest less consistency in rater decisions. The reliability of machine analytic scores were similar or somewhat lower than human analytic scores, and standard deviations were lower. So here we may be seeing a result of compressed score distributions. The means were a bit more variable, with the machine score for delivery being about 9/10 of a point higher than the corresponding human mean, and the machine score for language use being about 4/10 of a point lower than the mean for human scores. Now, let's look at the performance of hybrid scores created through various combinations of human and machine analytic scores, which were intended to approximate the construct measured by holistic operational scores. So, 4 different types of hybrid or composite scores were created, and in each case, analytic scores for the 3 subdomains were averaged to produce a composite holistic score. The first composite score was made up solely of human analytic scores. Then, 2 composites were created that contained 1 machine score along with 2 human scores. In the second composite, the machine score for delivery was used, and in the third composite, the machine score for language use was used. Finally, a 4th composite was created from machine scores for delivery and language use, along with a human score for topic development. This composite was intended to operationalize the idea of having machines evaluate the foundational aspects of performance, while humans evaluate meaning and organization. So this brings us to research question number 2. Are hybrid human-machine scores more reliable than holistic scores? On the right are values for Cronbach's alpha for the different types of composite holistic scores, as well as the scores originally collected during operational scoring, where human raters made a single holistic judgment. And the answer is yes, all composites of human and machine analytic scores were more reliable than holistic scores. Alpha values for composite scores ranged from 0.90 to 0.94, while reliability of operational holistic scores was a bit lower at 0.88. However, among the composite scores, the all-human composite was the most reliable, and reliability steadily decreased with more machine analytic scores replacing human scores. There was no obvious trend in means, with means being similar across the composite and operational scores, all within the range of 16.1 to 16.6. And standard deviation was highest for the all-human composite and decreased as more machine scores were added. This comes as no surprise, given that standard deviations for the analytic scores were higher for the human scores and lower for the machine scores. And finally, operational holistic scores were roughly in the middle in terms of standard deviation. Now, I would like to recap the findings and briefly discuss some potential interpretations and limitations of the study. Then I will finish up with some commentary on possibilities for combining the efforts of humans and machines in evaluating test-taker performance. First, for research question 1, we found that human judgments for topic development were less reliable than for delivery or language use. So, human raters were in some ways not so different from machine systems in that they seemed to be better at evaluating the more foundational aspects of speaking performance. And this probably shouldn't be too surprising. The phenomena associated with delivery and language use tend to be more concrete than those for topic development, and so scores for topic development may therefore require a higher degree of interpretation on the part of the rater. Where more interpretation is required, more disagreement should be expected. For research question 2, we saw that composite human-machine scores were more reliable than the holistic or operational scores. This finding would seem to support the notion that there is an advantage to the divergent contributory scoring model, where humans and machines focus on different aspects of performance. But in honesty, I suspect the increased reliability of composite scores was mostly due to having more observations going into the score. Moreover, increasing use of machine analytic scores actually reduced the reliability of composite scores. And again, this latter result may be due to central tendency in machine scores, in turn a consequence of using regression as the machine learning method. This brings us to some limitations of the study that will be important to consider in interpreting the study findings. So let's have a look at that next. So a first limitation is that linear regression was used as the machine learning approach with the resulting central tendency in scores. Now, there was an important rationale for using regression, and that is because regression is transparent in the way language measures are combined to produce a score. So this was a key concern for this study, where understanding construct coverage was critical. To understand if machine and human scoring can be used to address different aspects of performance, it was important to be as clear as possible regarding what the automated system was actually measuring. But use of more sophisticated machine learning approaches, such as deep neural networks, might have avoided the issue of central tendency and would probably better predict human judgments. However, this would have come at the cost of greater uncertainty in exactly how different aspects of performance were being evaluated to produce a score. A second limitation of the study is the small dataset used for machine learning. So scoring models were trained on 600 responses due to resource limitations, specifically the resources required to generate large numbers of human analytic scores. Operational scoring models would typically be trained on thousands to tens of thousands of responses. Still, even for this preliminary study, it's worth noting that we produced 7,200 analytic scores for use in the training and evaluation data partitions, and this was a non-trivial effort in terms of time and cost. Now, I would like to finish up with some thoughts on how we might productively combine the perceptions of humans and machines. First, an observation. The benefits of machine scoring are often framed in terms of scale, cost, and convenience. So, for example, the speed of score reporting. I call this the fast food model. And like fast food, when quality is mentioned, it is typically framed in terms of consistency. And convenience is important. Test results should be consistent, cheap, and quickly available. But perhaps there is also room for machine scoring to contribute to a superior end result. Ideally, this superior result would be an everyday event, but at least should be an option when extra effort is warranted for special occasions like high-stakes test uses. So next, I'll touch on a few ways that humans and machines might work together to produce scores or other information for score users that is of higher quality than might be feasible for humans or machines to achieve alone. A first option is in quality control of scores. I mentioned this earlier in the discussion of different hybrid scoring approaches, where machine review of human scores is used in the confirmatory scoring approach, and human review of machine scores is used in the flag and review approach. This option is relatively low-hanging fruit, and there are already examples of operational tests where machines have been used for QC of human judgments and vice versa. So some examples I gave earlier from ETS assessments include the GRE analytical writing section and the test of English for teaching. A second option is for humans and machines to produce more and/or more useful output. In our study, we combined human and machine scores into a composite result. But another way of doing things is to have machines and humans provide truly different kinds of information. As discussed earlier, machines might be used to evaluate specific concrete features of language or measure more fine-grained phenomena, while humans evaluate broader and more abstract features of meaning and effectiveness. Another interesting possibility might be to have machines provide quantitative feedback while humans provide qualitative feedback. So such qualitative feedback might take the form of comments or coaching, for example. And in the best possible world, users would have the opportunity to select different types of information that they want to see to suit their purposes. So more of an a la carte model. A final possibility I would like to mention is to use machines so that humans can be more human. The idea is that machines remove drudgery so that humans can focus on insight and connection. And of course, this is the idea behind all types of labor-saving devices and goes back at least a few hundred years. But more recently, there has been talk in the tech world about human-centered AI and the possibility of using AI to give humans superpowers. In other words, the idea is that AI could allow people to do things that they couldn't feasibly do before. In the realm of language assessment, one possible scenario along these lines might be to have machines provide information on performance, change over time, and etc., that then enables teachers to work individually with students more often and more productively. But developing such systems is no easy task, and there's no guarantee that such human-machine collaborations will work as intended. And it also seems very likely that teachers will need support to use such systems in a productive way. But I wonder if this might not be an opportunity to promote professional upskilling. Despite good intentions, there is still a real risk of a world where teachers are reduced to technicians. And I think we can all agree that it would be better to have a world where teachers are supported by technology, not replaced by it. And, finally, wouldn't it be nice to have a world where teachers are respected for their ability to use advanced technology to do a complex job? So, our study was really just an initial step in looking at new ways of combining scoring information from humans and machines. And in closing, it's not my intention to advocate for or against any particular approach. But rather, I would like to make the point that when considering scenarios for use of machine scoring, it needn't only be human or machine, but also could be human and machine. And here is a quick list of the references cited on the slides. And finally, I would like to thank Fumio Nakatsuhara for inviting me to speak at the CRELLA Winter Seminar, and I thank all of you for your attention.